Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is The Other Thing I Do. My guest this week is Adrian Murray, a writer, director, and occasional actor whose first film, Withdrawn, explored the desperation of a young man who launches a credit card scam to get himself out of a financial hole. His second feature, Retrograde, stars Molly Reisman as a young woman who falls down a rabbit hole of anxiety and self-destructive behavior after she gets a simple traffic ticket. It premiered at the 2022 Canadian Film Festival, and it opens in theaters across Canada this Friday, May 19th. It's very good, and you should check it out. Adrian picked Dazed and Confused, Richard Linklater's 1993 comedy about some teenagers in Austin, Texas on the last day of school in 1976. Filled with youthful energy, terrible fashion choices, and what we now recognize as Linklater's signature love of casual conversation, it boasts one of the best casts of its decade, though it would take a few years for anyone to realize it. And yeah, it's a little weird to revisit it 30 years later. We got older, but the actors stayed the same. This is Someone Else's Movie.
So Dazed and Confused, I have a long relationship with. At first, when it started showing up in my life, like at people's, high school birthday parties, they would throw it on as like a real fun, cool movie. And I didn't get it then. I didn't like it. And it kept on being thrown on while I was, going to university and stuff. And at that point, you really should like Linklater as a film student in university. But I still just couldn't connect with Dazed and Confused. I thought it was maybe an arrogant movie, an irritating movie, sort of I don't know, like it was a try hard of a movie in my mind then. And then something just slowly started changing. I watched it, this is a movie, no matter if you like it or not, you're going to see it a bunch of times in your life, I found. And just a few years ago, I rewatched it again, and I just really fell in love with it. I found it was a much darker, much more nuanced, subtle and engaging movie, than I had originally thought. I thought it was, I don't know, almost like no disrespect to the American Pie franchise, but I thought it was like the American Pie of art house films or something. And
Actually...
and I actually do think it might be that, but now I really love that about it. It's this movie that I watch it and I feel like it's balancing this really violent darkness, like pervasive darkness and violence. But then there's the optimism of being a teenager and just going to a party and having the whole world ahead of you. So it's this movie of two extremes that I now just love rewatching it to explore both ends of this. And I find that I find each time I watch it, I can find something new to latch onto and really dig into. And I love that, you can have this changing relationship with films where you can hate them one time and love them later, or love them at one time and then, just totally feel like they've got nothing going for them later on in life. So,
well, the film occupies such an odd place, I think, everywhere. Because I was already in my 20s when I saw it, because I saw it at TIFF in 1993. I guess it was the Midnight Madness opener, if I remember correctly.
Oh, wow.
But I saw it at a press screening the day before at like 10 o'clock in the morning, and it had the bleary, drifting experience at 10 o'clock in the morning, waiting for the Midnight Madness thing, waiting for whatever it was that was going to be wild, because 92's Midnight Madness was like Peter Jackson and Man Bites Dog and Night Wild. It was a phenomenal year of extremes. And this was the softer, gentler version. And I could see it absolutely playing with a bunch of people who just maybe smoked up outside the theater before going in, which is definitely the way it's intended to be seen. But at 10 o'clock in the morning, it was just this lazy easing into these lives. And it worked. It worked great. But I also felt slightly underwhelmed, just because the whole point of the movie is that this isn't it, right? Like this is the night that they'll look back and remember. But the whole point of Linklater's film, as with Waking Life, I think in a different way, is just like, we don't fully appreciate the things that are happening to us when they're happening. We just stumble through them. And then if you get out the other side and you still have all your fingers and toes, like you count yourself lucky. And then 20 years later, it's like it's his American Graffiti. But with American Graffiti, Absolutely. The war is coming, right? Like there is I think that's why he was so clever about setting it when he said it, because in 1976, the war's over. And all they have is nothing. Like this is a generation without purpose yet. And some of them are going to get consumed by the Reagan Revolution. Like absolutely, Ben Affleck's going to go to Congress. But it's all about not being who you are yet and having no guideposts. And that's what I love about it now, is watching Pink not fit in or fit in with everyone, depending on the situation. Like he doesn't have a personality yet. And I'm sure that wasn't the intention when Linklater wrote it, that it's a story about somebody trying to figure out what he's going to be. But that's the spine of it that forms. And maybe it's just in casting Jason London because he has a twin brother. And, I'd seen him in some other stuff, I think, or I'd seen the brother. I'd seen one of them before anyway. And it was this weird moment of like, oh, this guy's not really anything. And I don't mean that as an insult. It's just like he's a complete blank slate. And then watching that character become the center of the story and passing through everybody and reacting to everything, it was this perfect mirror to Slacker, which was Linklater's debut, where there is no central character. Like we are the central character. We're just going from person to person listening to monologues. And that's exactly the same thing here, except that it's a period piece and it's an ensemble piece, and there are no non-actors. Everybody in it is a stone pro already. It's fascinating in retrospect, but in the moment, it's just kind of there, which is, I think, why it ended up being this perennial, because you could put it on and it would just happen and you don't really need to plug all the way in. But then on second and third and fourth viewings, it's just like, this sounds so dumb. It's a grower, not a shower.
Absolutely, it is. I mean, and that fits with my comparison to American Platforms, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, weirdly enough, yes.
But I totally agree. And, what you said about it, it's just things almost happening to this character. I think that does feel like that's very relatable for life. It isn't what you normally expect from a movie, to just have sort of a totally passive, reactive character like that. But that is more or less what our lives are. We are surrounded by this like insurmountable mundanity that we're just sort of reacting to. And I think the film really captures that well. And the other thing, watching it again and again and again and again, at the beginning, I felt like it wasn't leading anywhere. But now I'm like, oh, I actually kind of feel like it very clearly has a gravity that everything's being pulled towards. Everything's going towards this party, and everything's going towards Pink's decision to sign that form about not doing drugs so he can stay on the football team.
The pledge, yeah.
Yeah. And, so now I watch it and I'm kind of in awe of how subtly that gravity works on everyone and every aspect of the film. Yeah. And yeah, again, relatable. We feel, I relate to not feeling like I have a ton of control in my life. And then, I think most people in Pink's situation would probably just sign the letter like everyone else encouraging him to do. But then it's so triumphant that he doesn't, that he, like you said, there's no, in the context of the film, there's no like big war or big cultural moment, in that people are trying to fight against, that at least it's not in the film at that point. And so it's really exciting to see someone actually fight against this more subtle, I don't know, authoritarian figure. Yeah.
I mean, I think of all the kids that we meet, Pink is probably the one who watched a few Watergate hearings. And, he's mistrustful of authority, like every high school kid is. Mm-hmm. But he's probably the only one on the football team who would take it to that level. Like he's a cipher in that he doesn't, like, he's not a jock as we have come to understand them. Like we see plenty of stereotypes in the film, but Pink's not one of them. Mm-hmm. Like we have Wooderson for contrast, who is just this amazing breakout role for McConaughey, of course, like who people now, I love talking to people who didn't see the film until recently, and think it's a Matthew McConaughey vehicle because he's the clip, like he's the gif, he's the I get older, they stay the same age. That's him. That's what everybody remembers about the movie, but he's barely there. He's great. Like Linklater knows exactly how to deploy him, but it's not his story. Like it can't be. He doesn't go to school anymore. He's an outsider. And Pink is the one who sees him as a person instead of a cartoon. Like he doesn't initially, but then in the end, they're breaking up fights together. Like they're recognizing each other's decency.
Yeah.
And Pink is open. And of course, the name is just amazing. Randall Pink Floyd, because unimaginative teenagers would call him Pink because his last name is Floyd. It's not because he likes the music. It's not like, it's great. It is a non sequitur for him. Mm-hmm. But he's our guide because he's got this awakening conscience of some sort that even he doesn't understand. He just knows he doesn't like to sign things that people tell him to sign. I don't think he could even, he tries to articulate it over and over again in the film.
Yeah. Well, when you're a teenager, I think there's a common feeling is that you know something might be wrong, but you have very little idea of what it is, let alone how to articulate it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's Linklater's genius, is the unexpressed stuff. I mean, that's what the Before movies are all about. When he does something big and declarative like School of Rock, it turns into a cartoon because it's all exposition and declarative. And, like, how do we fix this problem? Well, we do this and we do this, and then we sing a song. And his rambling movies, the ones that are unstructured or that have a hidden structure, like the Before movies or Everybody Wants Some, which is kind of the spiritual successor to this. Mm-hmm. They're the ones where I think we see his heart. Like his real interest is just hanging out and talking to people, and finding out where they're going to take the conversation. And this is him putting us in the position of letting him steer, but he's not going to be really fussy about it. Like it's the same. It is. I keep coming back to American Graffiti because it's the obvious model. It's just kids in cars getting into trouble. Yeah. But in this case, they're all united by this last day of school foolishness, where they're trying to do something, like they're chasing a legend that they're going to write for themselves anyway. And that won't actually happen because they're high school kids in Texas in 1970. Like there's not going to be an adventure. They don't even have the language for it yet. Star Wars is still a year away, right? Like the world hasn't changed around them exactly. But the ramble is the point. And watching people reveal themselves in moments and just bond or not bond or realize that they're probably never going to see each other again and be fine with it. Like the melancholy that hits in the last 2 seconds it's inevitable, but it's so weirdly perfect that you spend enough time with these kids that you forget how meaningful this is going to be. And like he's tricking us into that. There are versions of this movie, and I've seen them, that are heavy with portent. Mm-hmm. Where every act break is somebody opening a beer bottle and saying, this is probably the last time I ever do this with you. And they're not as good. They're chasing the thing that this movie achieves effortlessly, which is just to have a personality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and like you said, it's about not knowing what's, there's a lot of not knowing what's passing you by as it's happening, and mm-hmm. not knowing that's going to be the last time you see that high school friend or whatever. The backdrop of this film. So I want to talk about like the extremes of the happiness in this film and the darkness, because there is such joyful moments in this film.
Oh yeah, please.
Youthful glee, like when the kids, are able to dump the paint bucket on, I forget the character's name, but when they finally, get their comeuppance. And there's just the joy of, seeing friends have a good time together. There's the joy of seeing, when the kids get a ride with Pink in their car and they get to feel like the cool kids finally. Mm-hmm. The joy of, I guess, a well-told coming of age story is just, you've got sort of that real heartwarming stuff. But then the backdrop, I find it's this incredibly and cartoonishly at times violent world. You literally have these men chasing around kids with bats to beat them up. When the kids try and get released from school early, their teacher basically reveals he has PTSD from the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And even what the girls are going through, like the hazing routine that they're going through, is incredibly like horrific and violent, but done
it's evil. It's evil. Yeah.
And it's done with a smile, and they're almost happy to go through it. Or, I don't know if it's, some characters are just excited to like meet the violence they're going to have to deal with in their life, or
horrible way of putting it, but yeah.
But and I don't think it's like the world is a kind of cruel and violent place, but it's also not only that. And I think that this film is really great at showing those extremes. There's one shot in it, I forget when it happens, but it's just one of the cars driving away, and in the background you've got one of the older guys just wailing on a kid with one of his bats, and we just have a pop song blaring, and it's kind of a throwaway transition that could be played for laughs, but if you change the soundtrack, it's also like an incredibly bleak image.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my twice-weekly newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about the quiet apocalypses of Deep Impact and Knock at the Cabin, and revisited Flashdance in Paramount's new 4K edition and discovered a fascinating cultural artifact. This week, it's our first anniversary. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Simcast Twitter account. Really, first anniversary. Come check it out. Well, that's it, right? Like when they look back, they're going to realize how bad it was.
Yeah.
Or how dangerous things were. Hey, that guy threw a gun at you. Like people get
that's right.
People get threatened, like legitimately. Yeah. There is life or death stuff, but that's again of course, it's Linklater's Boyhood, where we're always aware of the dangers that aren't happening. And I remember when that came out, people were annoyed that like that the scene where they're playing with the bandsaw doesn't pay off. And it's like the point is he knows not to do it, and we're watching this person evolve, this soul, develop a sense of responsibility and consciousness. And Boyhood is way more explicit about that. And Dazed and Confused is just sort of floating there. Nobody dies. Nobody gets hurt. I mean, the bat stuff there'll be bruises. But it's the kind of thing you would dismiss as, horseplay, I guess is the word, right? Like it's the kind of thing that everybody writes off. And the abuse of the future sorority sisters is similarly the kind of thing that everybody just sees as necessary and required to fit into society. And yeah, Linklater's always understood that. Mm-hmm. The way that social mores are imposed on us and we figure it out. Like there's entire stretches of the Before films where they're talking about that very thing and how we grow up to reject the things that we reject. Yeah. And none of these kids knows any better. And so it's a miracle that they all make it. And some of them are going to be carrying the trauma forever. But in that moment, right, like it's just a thing that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're basically like play acting what they expect their futures to be, like the girls are play acting being some sort of, perverted form of like marriage, He's forced to go and declare her love for, someone who's a stranger to her, etc. And, and then running from that or running away from the safety, trying to embrace it. I find this sequence where the three kids go to their middle school dance to take their friend away from it. And they're walking through and you have all the kids just slowly, holding each other and dancing. And it's adorable because, the girls are all taller than the guys, like, puberty's been wreaking havoc on these guys. And, but it's just like this, slow. It's like you're walking through like a nest of chrysalids,
Yeah.
but they're so eager to break free of it. And even when they leave, the teacher's like, once you leave, you can't come back. And they all make fun of that. And it's, it's just that fun. When you're a child, you're always trying to be 1 year older because that's when all the cool stuff happens.
Right. Yeah.
Not realizing kind of that comfort. Like I think they go in and they literally tear his, one of their friends away from, making out with some girl that he has a crush on. And they think that their little journey about going and, trying to get beer and run away from people with baseball bats is going to be more fulfilling than that.
Yeah. And then the kids who do understand that something bigger is at play, like Adam Goldberg's character, for example, they're miserable. They're not enjoying any of this. They already know they don't want to be there. And I love the contrasts, too, between Pink's idiot friends who are really just out for a good time and don't have any depth. And deliberately, that's not what they're underwritten. They just don't want to do anything more than what they're already doing. They like their lives. But you see the kids here who are going to be the next Woodersons,
mm-hmm.
right? You can tell who they are. And then there's this whole other subset of kids who cannot wait for this to be over and go to college because that's where you learn, that's where you grow. Like that's where the better drugs are, which is clearly a thing in this community, that the stuff they're using isn't what they want it to be.
Yeah.
But he understands that too. Like Linklater even gets that in the scenes with the tiny little scenes with Affleck, who is never going to leave. I mean, he'll be a state senator. He won't be a senator.
Yeah.
But he's never going to be anything other than who he is. And it's not Affleck, it's Fred O'Donnell. I don't want to be mean. Affleck has actually turned out, like, this film is an incredible petri dish of talent. To look back and think, oh, this guy, there's an Oscar winner. There's an Oscar winner. There's an Oscar winner. There's Parker Posey, who should have 3 by now. And it's remarkable how much raw talent is. Like, Mila Jovovich is going to go off and lead an action franchise series that will make billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And somehow they're all in Austin, Texas to make this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories of have you read the book? Have you read the behind the scenes book? All right, the oral history. So a journalist, Melissa Mayers, wrote it in 2020. There's an excerpt from it on Vulture, which I have here right in front of me because I want to get this quote right. But it is exactly what we were saying. The experience of making the movie was exactly what the experience of watching the movie is. It's Rory Cochrane saying, nobody got hurt, thankfully. And Nikki Katt doubling down by saying, in hindsight, it's incredible. Nobody drove off a cliff or anything. We were pretty off the leash. They were all high. Some of them bought guns. Cole Hauser and Nikki Katt tell a story about Rory discharging a firearm on the roof of a building because it wasn't deliberate. He had a gun in his hand and was trying to figure out how it worked, and it goes off. And that's not even in the movie because you wouldn't believe it if you saw it, right? Like, if that was that would make the film too dramatic. To have that moment. Instead, we just have a gun present, the same way the bandsaw's there in Boyhood. Like, Linklater knows that's all you need. And you'll think about it later. And it's like, oh yeah, it is a good thing nothing bad happened there. But if it turns into a scene that is staged for dramatic effect, it's a movie. It's too dramatic. We wouldn't believe it. This way, even though it's fictional, it feels like you've just wandered into this thing. Yeah. And I think that's his greatest gift, is to let us be genuine spectators, and to think about what he's showing us and whether depiction really is endorsement. I don't think it is, but there's a whole generation now that's going to say this is a movie about toxic masculinity and male and white privilege. And like, yes, it fucking is. That's the point. But it doesn't mean it's for it. It's about understanding it and realizing it and doing better.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, it, like, on that topic, it to me really shows also how helpless, these characters are in the face of, toxic masculinity and this violence, because they don't have any other role models. The parents are, the adults in their world are all damaged, cruel, and violent in to some degree,
or absent completely. And
the older boys are, aping them. And the younger boys, we know that there's going to be a whole batch of them just growing up to ape these guys, because that's what happened. and they've been taught nothing else. It's almost thrown, anything that's kind of progressive in the film is almost thrown away as a joke, which I think is another thing that Linklater does well, and why he does people getting high really well too. Is I guess also because they were actually high, but because he he does it. There's always the grain of truth what these high characters are talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're talking about the power structures at play. And then that leads into conspiracy theories, etc. But they're almost the closest ones to actually addressing what these guys are going through. But they're so out of their minds, they can't, it's so slippery.
Yeah. No one can ever articulate what the problem is in his movies, or they're hyper articulate like Jesse and Celine.
Yeah.
And I kind of love that about him. I've interviewed him a few times, and he has absolutely no problem drilling into like motifs and themes and his point and the larger arguments that he's making with his body of work, really. Mm. But I love the way he writes inarticulate characters, because casual conversation sounds like that. People don't get heavy with each other, or when they do, they're drunk or high, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the bumbling, the stumbling into each new situation and out of each new situation is so authentic. Like, I wasn't a teenager in the 70s, but I know those kids. That feels so real. And his gift is to just get out of the way of the characters he's created. Like, he's built this world, and then he just lets it run. Like, he pulls the string and lets it run and films it. And I know it's more complicated than that, but I really do think that's how he sees it. He's creating these moral incubators and just letting the little Sims run around inside for our enjoyment.
Totally. Yeah. It feels like a very light touch on his part. Like, there's almost nothing, I feel like you must feel like on those sets, like there's nothing that can be done wrong, really. Because he's just set up, like, because everything rings so true. Like, I doubt anything was exactly how anyone imagined it to be, but I feel like he's just he must be so present in the situation, and not trying to force people to act in some way that their personalities can just come out and roam free in the world, and it's that roaming that makes it true. So
yeah, that's a really good way to put it. The film is just as the characters are unmoored, the film is unanchored. Right, the film is adrift in them, but it ultimately knows it can pull out an oar. And I'm ruining this metaphor. It knows where it's going. Like, it knows where it's going to be in the end. He has the roadmap, but nobody else does.
Yeah, exactly.
Or we believe that no one else does. He can convince us of that.
Well, and maybe no one needs to. If the film's going to make it to the party,
Yeah.
Oh, it's not like any character is going to somehow go completely off track, because the whole film's going there. It's almost like a road trip movie where the structure can just be you go away and then you're going to either get there or not, or anyway. Yeah, I'm trying to go deep in this metaphor too, and I'm kind of derailing it, but
I ruined it. I started off badly. But it comes away, but everything's all right, because that's the point. Like, it is okay to step into this river for the 24 hours that it exists, to watch this movie, to visit this world, and then leave and think about your own experiences. And there's something uniquely American about the high school picture, even though they're made elsewhere in the world. Mm-hmm. I think it's just because American television has conformed a sense of what high school movies are supposed to be, like what high school narratives are. And it's perfect. They have beginnings, middles, and ends. There's clear divisions between the characters in freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And we all are supposed to want the same things: to, make friends, to kiss somebody, to go to college. Like, that's the arc of all of these. And by setting it on the last day of school and having those conversations already over, like, they've all either achieved or failed to achieve. And that's where we meet them, where they're either peaking in one way or another, or having failed to make the experience they wanted. They're now miserable and cynical, or they're just like Pink. They're wrestling with the future in a way he can't even articulate. Like this isn't going to be the only time I think he refuses to do something.
Yeah, for sure.
And it makes me feel good about his chances. I'm kind of surprised he never did a sequel. It's probably just impossible with scheduling to get everybody back together.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting. I'd trust him to do it.
Right? Like, of anybody.
Yeah.
He's proven that he can do this. I mean, maybe for all we know, he's been working on one for 25 years anyway and just not told anybody.
Yeah, for sure.
I honestly felt betrayed when Boyd was announced. He's like, what do you mean you've been working on this? This is the most fascinating thing in the world, and you've managed to not tell anybody.
I know, that was really shocking. I don't know how that wasn't just out and about in the news, but yeah, there did it.
yeah, it's incredible. And more secret projects, please, because I trust him. I trust him to do the thing he wants to do. I think he's tried, that Bad News Bears remake. He has tried to do studio work, and it's just not his, like, clearly at this point, it's not his thing.
I honestly, I think I really started to understand his films a little bit more after I saw a couple James Benning films.
Oh yeah.
I had known that they had some kind of connection because of Texas and whatever. And then I saw El Cohen at TIFF. Oh, that was a perfect TIFF movie, by the way, that I really loved. Landscape Suicide. And and also just, some of his other long take things where it's like 25 cigarettes or whatever, and it's 25 people just smoking a cigarette. And I'm like, you can kind of see Linklater's structures, what he's sort of getting from this. You can see the slacker aspect of that. You can see the Dazed and Confused, where he's just saying, okay, the structure is somewhat rigorous in that we're going to follow these people. But where it's not rigorous is that I'm not really going to be too heavy-handed with what these people do.
Yeah, it feels like the environment is more important in some cases than the premise. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, he cops to it in Waking Life, where he has his own cameo as God, effectively, telling us that this is the world he's built, and we're all living in it. But I think that is the thing that delights him the most, is observing, is not pushing things towards a resolution or even creating a dramatic arc, other than the will they, won't they of the before films, where each film becomes a test of this couple's ability to see each other. And I asked him about that once, and he just said, that's not what I'm doing. And it's like, yes, it is, though. Like, you're watching. You want to know. We want to know, and you want to know.
Yeah, that is there, that will they, won't they aspect. I mean, that's the thin hook of the films, right? So yeah.
And he's saying, I just want to watch them. I want to experience this couple and see what they are. And it's like, yeah, that's the whole point. Are they still a couple? Will they be a couple by the end of the film? That's the question.
Well, he always can give you just enough to hang on to give the movie some sort of structure. Like with Dazed, it was the night, it was the party, and the signature. With the before ones, it's basically the will they, won't they. He gives you, I think, just enough to then step back and observe. So the film is still going somewhere, but you're just watching the river flow. Yeah.
And I've been trying to figure out how to tie this to Retrograde, because it is a film about someone under a microscope, really. I mean, we're encouraged to watch very, very closely as someone comes apart, which is the kind of psychological intensity that Linklater doesn't seem interested in that kind of acuity. But in a weird way, it is just like, it's a situational observational project, in the same way where we are placed in a box with someone who could do the right thing and fix things, but won't for whatever reason, and just keeps making it worse. And it's such a tiny thing that starts this snowball of neurosis. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's an uncomfortable watch in the best possible way, because I feel like the empathy of it is what worked for me, where you're just like, why is this happening? Why are you doing this to yourself? And then you realize that's the point of it. The question is why. Mm-hmm. But is there anything, I'm not sure this works, but the question of the podcast is still the same. Is there anything from Dazed and Confused that you have borrowed or lifted or outright stolen for your own work? and specifically for Retrograde?
With Dazed wasn't really a touchstone for me, but Linklater in general has been. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, but his film It's Impossible to Learn to Plow by Reading Books. Mm-hmm. That one was a huge touchstone for me for my first film. And it's been talked about before, where like with Kevin Smith, where you have those films that you just kind of get excited because you think I could do that. That doesn't necessarily mean you can, but it just means that there's it gives you a framework where you think, oh, technically I can do that. Technically I can make a feature. So, in a very formal sense, the way Linklater does his structures, I have kind of lifted. Like, I do just want to observe people, but I want to show that the film is heading somewhere, so that you don't feel like it is aimless by the end of it. And I love how thematically rich his films are. So it's hard to steal that, but it's something that I've noticed, and he's not the only one, but I think from him, it's mostly the structures, rigorous structures, and inarticulate characters that, that would be sort of what I try and take from his work, if there is something.
Yeah, I can see it. I mean, there's a sense in Retrograde that the film itself is going to crack open if nothing happens, if she doesn't act, if something doesn't change, which is distressingly relatable to me as a viewer. Like, we've all been in these situations, but you found a way to start from a position of kind of almost absurdity and then just build it into something so much darker and more real that I'm sort of in awe of it.
I'm glad. Yeah, I guess this can tie back to Linklater, because what I wanted to do with it was make something inconsequential become incredibly consequential. And, Molly's struggle does, like she does, you can expand it and it actually does signify very big things for her. And it could signify these big things, these big questions you ask about, do I have control, and how do I get control of my life? What is my place in this world? And so, like Linklater, you have very small things becoming very significant to characters, whether they know it or not.
My thanks to Adrian Murray, whose film Retrograde opens in theaters across Canada this Friday, May 19th. Thanks also to Alia Stationwala. She knows what she did. Adrian's not on Twitter. Can't really blame him at this point, but you can find Dazed and Confused on 4K, Blu-ray, and DVD in the Criterion Collection. It's also streaming on Crave in Canada and Amazon in the US, and available to rent or buy on various VOD platforms. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can. I'll see you next week.